Now, I am tired of the white tears. You are competent. You are not concerned. So the only people that are crying are the mediocre white boys.
This Congresswoman just went on one of the nastiest rants I've ever heard, and the Democratic Party is cheering her on. Up first, guys, I really wasn't expecting to be talking about Jasmine Crockett, the Democratic Congresswoman from Texas, to be talking about her again so soon after we just covered her the other day, but she just gave one of the most shocking and unhinged television interviews I think I've ever seen a politician give. And rather than condemn her insane and hateful rant about white men, the Democratic Party, again appearing to have learned absolutely nothing, doubled down on it and echoed and embraced it. Before we even get to the nastiest part of the interview that Jasmine Crockett gave with Laura Coates Live over on CNN, I just want to fact check something she said that is not even close to being accurate. Take a listen.
We right now have a white supremacist that is sitting in the White House. He is backed up by other white supremacists. And if you really want to know who the criminals are in this country, you can Google it. You don't have to trust me. But the people that commit 80% of the most violent crimes in this country are white supremacists. Yet for whatever reason, they sit and they serve at the pleasure of the president. They are the ones that were there on January 6th, tearing our democracy down physically. And now we have them tearing us down right here from within. Here is the problem.
Of course, Congresswoman, to interrupt you, but President Trump, of course, has denied any allegations he's a white supremacist, and that's why he apparently fired what he is.
We're gonna need a fact check on aisle Jasmine. One, calling Donald Trump a white supremacist is pretty absurd. He's definitely said some racially insensitive things over the years, but his coalition expanded to include more minority voters this past time around. He's appointing people of all different races. Nothing that he's trying to do is about promoting white people over everyone else. You can criticize him, but that's a hysterical take. And two, the claim that she makes that white supremacists are responsible for 80% of violent crime in this country, I don't even know what she's talking about. I searched and tried to find any statistical basis for that claim, and it doesn't exist. White people commit about 50% of non-fatal violent crime and about 41% of homicides where the offender, so the killer's race, is known to police. Not 80%, and in fact, that's, if anything, slightly underrepresented relative to population levels. Like, I have no idea what she's talking about. And there's no proof that all those people, or even most of them, are white supremacists. Of course, there have been horrific attacks and atrocities committed by white supremacists, like Dylan Roof comes to mind and others. And those people deserve to rot in hell and are evil, but spreading hysterical fake statistics and alarmist narratives is not productive, to say the very least. Neither is where Congresswoman Crockett went next, which is one of the most unhinged rants insulting white men that I've seen, and coming not from some woke journalist or some TikToker, but a sitting member of Congress. She actually said this, and honestly, it left even the CNN host stunned.
The coddling is for the white boys. That's what's happening right now. I am tired of the white tears. Listen, if you are competent, you are not concerned. When I walk into Congress every single day, you know why I don't feel a way and why you can't make me doubt who I am? Is because I know that I had to work 10 times as hard as they did just to get into the seat. When you look and you compare me to Marjorie Taylor Greene or me to Lauren Boebert, there is no comparison. And that is the life that we have always lived. So the only people that are crying are the mediocre white boys that have been beaten out by people that historically have had to work so much harder.
So for me, the funniest part of that clip is that there's actually quite a good comparison between Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene, because Marjorie Taylor Greene is a crazy person and kind of clownish on the far right side, and Jasmine Crockett is exactly that on the far left side. But to be clear, what she just said is so toxic and also so totally wrong and just makes absolutely no sense, either politically, just in terms of strategy, but also not on its merits. Like, what is she talking about? That only incompetent white boys are upset about DEI practices that discriminate against them. No, Jasmine. Part of the problem is that competent people feel hard done by because the criteria to evaluate people aren't meritocratic. I mean, we covered so many examples of this on this show just in the last few months, from Disney admitting on hidden recordings that they won't hire white people, white men for certain roles, to the University of Colorado being caught openly saying they're only going to hire certain races for new jobs, to things like affirmative action, where people were treated totally differently if they had the same scores and grades but different skin colors. The point is that people are upset because they're not being evaluated on their merit. So not just incompetent people are mad, competent people are screwed over by these policies in both directions. Both, people who aren't part of a marginalized group who then don't get an opportunity because they're lifting the scales artificially, putting their thumb on the scales to jerry-rig diverse outcomes. But also, the big losers here are competent minorities, women, people of color, what it may be, who do deserve to get into that school, to get that job on their merits. But because of this system that privileges people in their groups artificially sometimes, they're then unfairly viewed as DEI hires or diversity hires in a way that's not fair to them because they are qualified. So they're losers too. And that's why a lot of this stuff is actually increasingly unpopular with minorities themselves. And just the callous way that this Congresswoman is speaking about white men and white people and how she doesn't care, she's sick of white tears and she's sick of these mediocre white boys. It's like very racially hostile and inflammatory. And you would never get away with it in the opposite direction. I wouldn't do this because it's such a classless and toxic way to speak. But imagine if I went on CNN and I said about, the people upset about ending DEI practices in the federal government, I'm sick of the black tears and these incompetent black women who are sobbing because they can't get handouts and special treatment anymore. They jump down my throat on that, and to some extent fairly so, because it's a very divisive and inflammatory way to speak, and that's why I would never say it like that. That's never how I would choose to present myself. But you have a total double standard here, because not only was she not checked by the CNN host here, Laura Coates, the entire Democratic Party apparatus celebrated her dunking on mediocre white men and their white tears. The official rapid response page of the Democratic Party, called Fact Post, narrator, they do not only post facts, shared Jasmine Crockett's clip from CNN, quoting her, "If you are competent, you are not concerned. The only people crying are mediocre white boys." So condemning people who have any concerns about DEI and the unfair treatment it sometimes entails as just mediocre white boys who are crying their white tears is not just something one fringe extreme Congresswoman said, but it's a message that the Democratic Party in its official apparatus doubles down on, endorses, and amplifies. That is disgraceful. That is unhinged. And again, we come back to this theme in our recent coverage. It shows they are learning absolutely nothing and that they actively seem to want Donald Trump Jr. 2028 or J.D. Vance 2028, because this is how you got Trump, and it's how you'll get more Trump or more Trumpism. I do want to point out that some sensible left-of-center commentators and journalists pushed back on the Democratic Party for embracing this toxic rhetoric. My friend Brianna Wu wrote, "This is flat out embarrassing and makes Democrats unelectable. I'm no longer going to support any ideology that treats parts of the country as disposable and inherently evil." Look, if they were listening to Brianna, who was a Democratic strategist, and not listening to woke 20-somethings who think this stuff is amazing, the Democrats might have much better chances politically. Pollster Frank Luntz pointed out that this type of language is popular in progressive circles, but is toxic waste to voters outside of that. Congresswoman Crockett won her House seat by nearly 70% last year, so she won't see any electoral consequences, but other Dems might if this language becomes trendy with their base. I mean, this is absolutely true. People like this who are in super deep blue or super deep red seats, they can be extreme. In fact, they're incentivized to do so, but it actually hurts the members of their parties who actually have to win contested elections, because if Republicans were smart, when the midterms roll around, they would clip this up and then clip it with news stories about DEI being unfair to competent and qualified people. And then they'd frame Republicans as against this and Democrats as just disdainful and think you're just mediocre white boys. And that, I can tell you now, would be a very effective political ad campaign, gifted to the Republicans by this woman, Jasmine Crockett, who just seems desperate for attention and is willing to say things that are totally inflammatory and divisive and harmful to her side, and just immoral and evil to get it. Congresswoman Crockett just also seems very divorced from facts and reality, like she was in another part of this interview.
This is why they don't want us to have education. This is why they are trying to literally say we won't fund the HBCUs, because they know that if they've already gone after affirmative action and they're saying, you know what, don't allow them to come into, say, these PWIs, as we call them, don't allow them to come into these institutions. We know why they created the HBCUs in the first place. It was because they wouldn't allow us into the white institutions. And so now they're not allowing us in. And now they're saying, you know what, we're also going to defund the HBCUs. You know why? Because they don't want any more Kamala Harrises. They don't want any more Jasmine Crockett's. But I got news for them. I don't care what they do. We will fight to the end to make sure that we get our due. Because again, if you want to talk about the people that shouldn't be in this country, you probably need to look in the mirror, because the last time I checked, the Native Americans who some of ICE have been rounding up, or the Puerto Ricans who are absolutely Americans, listen, the only people that came and colonized this place are your ancestors, Trump.
Oh my God. There's so much there. So much false information and so many absurd arguments. But for one thing, for example, did she really just suggest that all white people in the country today don't belong here and really shouldn't be here? Kind of a psychotic take for a sitting member of our government who swore an oath to defend our country, apparently thinks it's illegitimate and evil and none of us should be here. And also, what she's talking about is not true. No Native American people have been deported or put into camps. A few indigenous people who've been caught up in ICE raids of different employment places of employment where a lot of undocumented workers have been asked to show their paperwork or their citizenship, and that's unfortunate, but I don't really think it's the end of the world. And it's kind of inevitable when you're going to deport large numbers of people, which Barack Obama also did, and I'm sure some other people were caught up in it. And then Congresswoman Crockett is just lying again. Donald Trump doesn't want to cut HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities like Howard and other institutions like this. In fact, he was applauded in his first term as president by some HBCU leaders for securing them significant funding. And she makes it sound like black people can't get into college without affirmative action. They can't get into non-HBCUs, so just everyday public colleges or private colleges that are, race neutral after the end of affirmative action. That's so not true. And I can't speak on behalf of black people, obviously, but to me that seems very belittling and demeaning to them, suggesting that if they're just treated equally and if there's no kind of thumb on the scales, then black people can't get education or they don't want us to have access to education. That's not it at all. We want them to have access to education, just like everyone else. We just want it to be fair and no racial preferences for or against any group. And she's acting like that makes us evil white supremacists or something. This woman is really, really extreme and toxic. And what's so funny about this is the segment, because I saw this little snippet of Jasmine Crockett where she talks about the mediocre white boys going viral on X. And I always want to try to get back to the source and find what's the full segment. And then I go and watch it. So I watched the full thing that most people are just showing you that little soundbite. I watched the full segment and clipped up other parts that they missed. But I also saw kind of the buildup and the context. And the context of this conversation was actually something that should be an easy win for Democrats she turned into this toxic, unhinged rant. So the setup of the story was that the Trump administration has made a guy named Darren Beattie, who is a very controversial figure. They've appointed him to a position at the State Department under Marco Rubio. And this is a really extreme person with tons of fringe views.
President Trump is appointing Darren Beattie to a top State Department role. I know many people remember who Darren Beattie is. He was fired in 2018 from being a speechwriter. He was speaking at a conference attended by white nationalists. And then a few months ago, he posted this, Congresswoman: competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work. Unfortunately, our entire national ideology is predicated on coddling the feelings of women and minorities and demoralizing competent white men.
Including tweeting in 2024 that competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work, which is obviously kind of crazy and racist. Competent people must be in charge if you want things to work. They don't have to be white and they don't always have to be men. That's just one of so many unhinged takes this dude has. He's weirdly pro-China and pro-CCP, pro-Communist Party. It's a very strange dude, and I think CNN and Democrats are totally right to raise the alarm and be like, why is the Trump administration appointing this crazy person? But Congresswoman Crockett had to take this layup and turn it into a massive own goal. Mixing of the sports metaphors there. Not great. But anyway, to me, it just shows like the toxic trap of identity politics. They can't help themselves, even though they're destroying their own political side of the aisle and turning off millions of otherwise gettable voters and Americans in the process. Other than that, though, Congresswoman Crockett, you're doing amazing, sweetie. What do you guys think? What did you think of this unhinged CNN segment and this interview with the Congresswoman? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet.